Red Harvest is one of those rare books where even after I've read the book in its entirety, I still wonder just what the fuck it was I'd just read. It's also one of those rare books where I'm completely divided. Usually I either like a book, dislike it, or feel it somewhere in the middle in the sense that it's not good, it's not bad, it's just okay. Red Harvest somehow managed to divide me exactly down the middle. I loved half of it and hated the other half. Most people disliked Red Harvest after reading Death Troopers, so I thought I'd give it a chance by reading Red Harvest first, then reading Death Troopers, thinking that might be the key to experiencing it as a good book. But boy was I wrong. Red Harvest is one of those books that's distanced so far from the source material it may as well not carry the Star Wars name. The biggest flaw with Red Harvest is also its driving force. It's a horror novel set in the Star Wars universe. As a result of this, the issues fall into two categories: defense against the zombies and character development. When it comes to defense against the zombies, the problem is that in a universe where people can literally lift boulders with their minds, shoot lightning from their fingertips, and cut through anything they want with lightsabers, even 2-foot deep metal blast doors as seen at the beginning of The Phantom Menace, a horde of bloodthirsty zombies should be no problem. There's absolutely no reason why a few Sith Masters and students couldn't use the Force to hold the zombies in the air while a few other students just slashed away with their lightsabers until nothing was left. That would be an effective and intelligent solution to end the zombie crisis in minutes, but because Joe Schreiber had almost, but not quite, 300 pages to fill, for the most part of the book, nobody uses Force powers and nobody uses lightsabers. I'm not even sure if Hestizo Trace, the main character, if you could call her that, has a lightsaber of her own, even though she's a member of the Jedi Agricultural Corps. I always thought they had lightsabers, they just didn't go on missions like Jedi Knights did, instead focusing on plants. On the Legends page for the Jedi Agricultural Corps on Wikipedia, there's a picture of a member of the Corps with a lightsaber on his belt. Even if you argued that because Hestizo is a member of the Corps and doesn't have a lightsaber, that still doesn't explain why nobody at the Sith Academy has lightsabers. Literally, only about 2 people had lightsabers on their person when the zombie outbreak happened. I can suspend my disbelief for some things, but my god, it's a fucking battle academy and nobody has any fucking weapons. Even the official Blade Master of the Academy only uses a lightsaber once, the rest of the time choosing it instead to use Force Lightning. I can't understand the reasoning for calling him a Blade Master if he only once throughout the entire book uses a lightsaber, especially when he's in a fight. Schreiber may as well have just called him a teacher rather than a Blade Master. At least it would mean that that part of the book didn't contradict itself. Halfway through the book, for about 1 chapter, a couple of lightsabers appear, then quickly disappear, and the next time a lightsaber is seen, it's in the conclusion of the book. I understand that not all stories need Jedi, Sith, or even lightsabers. Take Shadows of the Empire for example, it's very light with the Jedi stuff. Even the original trilogy was very light when it came to characters actually using lightsabers, especially compared to the prequel trilogy. But to have a Sith Academy as the setting of the book and barely have any lightsabers in it just shows that Joe Schreiber didn't have the slightest clue what he was doing when he wrote Red Harvest. What I can't work out though is why at one point in the story all the zombies ignite their lightsabers. So the students clearly had them, so why the fuck didn't they use them to defend themselves? It makes no sense and fits in perfectly with the plot because the plot is non-existent, so who gives a shit? The other big issue with the book is the character development, or more accurately, lack of it. I can't help but mention Alien at this point. In Alien, which is a masterclass in cinema by the way, we were introduced to about 7 characters at the beginning of the film. Ripley, of course, was the hero of the story. Dallas was the captain who didn't really care much but always followed the rules, especially when prompted to by Ripley. Lambert and Kane, who just wanted to do their jobs properly. Ash the scientist, and Parker, who was always after more money, and Brett, who was Parker's yes man. These characters slowly evolved over the course of the first half of the film, and between waking up from cryosleep until each member's demise at the hands of the Xenomorph, we learned about them and got a closer look at each of their personalities. By the time each character had met their fate in Alien, whether you liked them or not, you knew who they were and you felt like you could judge whether they deserved what was coming to them. Red Harvest does none of this. At the beginning of the book, Schreiber introduces 4 or 5 Sith students, with each being given a particular situation. This situation and how each character handles it is who that character is. It's the one defining moment each character of the Sith Academy has that will define their character for the rest of the book. There's no evolution of character or personality in this book. One of the Sith acolytes, Kindra, has about 3 sentences at the beginning of the book. Disappears, pops up at the halfway point, disappears, then pops up at the end. There's no in-between moments that allow us to see any character growth throughout the book. Even Hestizo Trace seems to be perpetually stuck in a state of being the mouse in a game of cat and mouse. She's never able to fend for herself, instead always relying on a bounty hunter, her brother, or worst of all, a plant. A dead plant at that. Hestizo has no talent, and it's a wonder she was allowed to stay in the Jedi Order at all, but at least by the end of the book she had learned a lesson. The problem though is that it's on the last few pages and not a part of the actual story, so at that point it was irrelevant. Hestizo's brother, Rojo, and I assume it's Rojo and not Rojo because Hestizo is clearly a Mexican name, or at the very least Mexican inspired, arrives at the planet to rescue her halfway through the book. At literally the midway point we see him get off his ship and look inside the windows of the academy at what's going on. Then right near the end of the book, after a load of stuff has happened time-wise, he's still standing there staring in. I can't for the life of me work out what he was doing for so long when Schreiber could have used that in-between time to give him a bit of character depth. This is the problem with character development in Red Harvest. Characters are introduced, disappear, then pop up when it suits them. It's incredibly annoying because in the case of Kindra, I had to flip back to the beginning of the book because I was sure someone was called Kindra in Red Harvest, only to discover that she had about 3 irrelevant sentences, then fucked off. There's no journey for these characters, and if there's no journey, we can't witness their growth. As such, when each character met their fate, unlike Alien, I just didn't care. The lack of character development can be attributed to 2 things. One is the fact that the book is only 250 pages long, and that leaves plenty of room for another 100 pages where we could have followed the characters more closely and witnessed a bit of character development. The other is that within those pages, far too much time is spent describing the horrors at the expense of the character's screen time. Don't get me wrong, the horror aspect, the gritty, gruesome darkness of it all was the one thing I did like about the book. I thought Schreiber did an excellent job with the descriptions and really bringing the horror of it all to life. But when all that comes at the expense of character development, it's not very entertaining because what you end up with is 200 pages of gore and 50 pages of characters, and that's not particularly interesting to read because there's barely any context. Even the bad guy, Darth Scabrous, was tragically underdeveloped. His character reads like the Dick Dastardly of the Star Wars universe, having only one goal in mind, and spending most of his time in his dark Tower of Doom. His goal is immortality, and that's all we know about him. That's literally it. There's no going back in his past to his time as an academy student, his memories or anything like that. He's Darth Scabrous, and he wants to be immortal. When zombies seem to have more personality than the main characters, something is drastically wrong. The overall plot is non-existent as well. Students at the academy, Scabrous infects everyone tries to survive, that's it. The story never goes any deeper than that, most likely because of the lack of character development. Speaking of Darth Scabrous, everyone seems to find the name lame, but I thought it was okay, especially when you compare it to the rest of the names in the book. There are the aforementioned Mexican siblings, but there's also Darth Dreer, Hartwig, and even Skopeek. The names are just so ridiculous that they can instantly pull you out of immersion. Not only that, but Schreiber also has this tendency to call both Hestizo and Rojo by their last names, and since they're siblings, this can make it quite annoying when moving from one chapter to the next. One minute you can be reading about Trace being shackled to a table, the next minute Trace is walking down the stairs. It's incredibly annoying and disorientating, and I'm not sure why he even bothered coming up with names for them, since most of the time Hestizo is called Zoe or Trace, and Rojo is called Trace. The idea of a talking plant is just utterly ridiculous. I wouldn't have minded if a force-sensitive plant could be communicated with if Hestizo could pick up the plant's mood using the force, but this plant has full-fledged conversations in Galactic Basic with Hestizo. Then there's the Keeper of the Sith Library at the Academy. He's a giant tree person that also talks, like an Ent. At first it felt like Schreiber fell off the Star Wars wagon onto the horror train, but when you realise there are at least 3 talking plants in Red Harvest, you realise Schreiber's fallen off the Star Wars wagon, landed on the horror train, and bought a one-way ticket on the Fantasy Express. Fair enough, the Nettie have been in other Star Wars stories before, like Dark Empire and Tales of the Jedi, but having a Nettie as well as having another talking plant just feels over the top. It was nice to see a Whippet make an appearance, considering the last time I read about a Whippet was probably in the original Mace Windu Clone Wars comic. He wasn't a particularly engaging character, but then again, none of the characters in Red Harvest were, and it was also nice to see an HK droid, although it was a bit disappointing that when he restored his assassination protocols, he didn't start calling everyone meatbags. Hestizo's force abilities also don't make sense. When she kicks into gear, she moves like the Flash. It's one thing to use the force to augment speed, but it's a whole nother thing when she effectively stops time. She literally slows time to the point that she can pull fired arrows out of the air and watch snowflakes stay in the air. She does it again at another point, and she actually vibrates through something like Barry Allen does. None of it makes sense, especially considering throughout the whole book she clearly couldn't look after herself. And I have to wonder why there were arrows in the first place. Red Harvest takes place after Knights of the Old Republic, so why does Tolk the Bounty Hunter insist on using a spear and a bow and arrows? Why not something like, I don't know, a blaster? It's distinctly not Star Wars and it doesn't make any sense. The final nail in the coffin was the way Scabrous wanted to attain his immortality. Apparently, cutting out the heart of a living Jedi and eating it in front of them will make someone immortal. Why? Because of the midi-chlorians, of course. Now, I don't mind the midi-chlorians. I do feel they were an unnecessary addition to the Star Wars universe, but over the years they've been used very sparingly, so I can accept them. But when it comes to essentially eating them makes somebody immortal, I give up. The whole book feels like Joe Schreiber has never seen a Star Wars film. It feels like somebody described Star Wars to him and then he was hired to write a Star Wars story, and he absolutely fails in every aspect. Red Harvest was released between 2 of the Old Republic books, and it's also set between 2 of the Old Republic books, so I have no idea why they didn't add a zombie section to the game and just give Red Harvest the Old Republic logo. Just like Battlefront 2, I now have to put my books out of chronological order if I don't want them to look like a mess. I know some people don't care about that stuff, and I know it's just a little thing, but I care and it pisses me off. In fact, nothing happens in Red Harvest that says it couldn't be set after all the Old Republic media, so I don't understand why they didn't just do that. Overall, Red Harvest is a massive disappointment. Reading Red Harvest without lightsabers or force powers is akin to watching a Fast and Furious movie without any cars. To make matters worse, there's a severe lack of plot, severe lack of character development, and an overabundance of description when it comes to the zombie attacks. I was really disappointed after reading Red Harvest, and to be honest, once I hit the halfway mark, it really became a struggle to finish the book. I'd say that since Red Harvest doesn't have any events in it that affected the Star Wars universe except for Death Troopers, and no other books referenced it, it can be very easily skipped, and I even consider it to be a worse book than Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void, and that's saying something.